Well, welcome everybody to JW3 and to this special Jewish Chronicle event with myself, the editor, and a clutch of our finest writers, as Judy mentioned. I'm not sure what the collective noun is for JC columnists, an illumination perhaps. So we have on my right, which is your left, Tanya Gold, who is a very well-known journalist, writes for The Spectator very regularly and The New Statesman, and of course for the Jewish Chronicle, and does lots of other wonderful things as well. And then to my immediate left is Melanie Phillips, Times and Jewish Chronicle columnist, and you have a Substack, which is melaniephillips.substack.com, which you can subscribe to as well. And finally, there's Howard Jacobson on the end, mainly a JC columnist, but has written some books as well. And of course, a Booker Prize-winning novelist and pillar of the community. And later on, we're going to be joined by Jonathan Freedland, who writes for The Guardian and for the Jewish Chronicle. He'll be beaming in behind us, overhead, and joining us for a short period, and I'll be speaking to him as well. So if you'll join me in welcoming the panel. So first of all, I'd like to start with Melanie, because Melanie, you've been in Israel until yesterday, and you live in Jerusalem. So if you could just paint a picture for us about what it's been like these past 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks in Israel, what the country is like, how you've felt, and just paint a picture about what's been going on from your point of view.
Yes, well, let me start with a little snapshot of that terrible day, Simchat Torah, just 2.5 weeks ago. Joshua and I were going to shul, it was Simchat Torah in Jerusalem, and it was 8:15, and we were walking down the street, and the air raid siren went off. And we looked at each other, and we said, Hamas, up to their usual tricks, one of their rockets got lost. And then we heard the bang as the Iron Dome went into action, and we saw the trace. It was actually quite close. And we said, what should we do now? And we went to shul. Elsewhere in the city, in another shul, that same siren went off at 8:15, and they had just finished a certain part of the service. There was an early service going on. And as soon as a particular young man in that congregation heard the siren, as soon as he heard the siren, he took off his talit and he ran. He understood what was required, and he understood that he would be called up immediately. For the rest of that day, we were in shul. News percolated into the service. The service was cut short. News percolated in that something terrible had happened in the south. We had no idea what it was. Those of us who observe the Shabbat properly, with all due respect to the rules, we didn't find out what had happened until that evening. But some people had, just like the Yom Kippur War, some people actually understood what had happened. And we were told that it was a very serious situation in the south. And when we turned on our televisions that evening, we would be amazed by what we saw. So the situation was that terrible day and the day after and the day after, I would say the Israelis were in total shock. Total shock. You have to understand, as I'm sure you all know, Israel is a very small country. I don't think there's a single family that's not touched personally by this. Either they had and were experiencing that day relatives who were being murdered, abducted, tortured, and all the rest of it, or they had relatives who were had been taken hostage, or they didn't know what had happened to their relatives because they just vanished, or they had children who were already in combat. I was told of one young man who was going to get married on the Tuesday after the attack, and as soon as he heard what happened, he rushed out of shul, he rushed into his car, he had friends in one of these kibbutzim on the border, he rushed down to the kibbutz. He found a scene of utter carnage, and he found terrorists all over. He killed many of them. many of them. He was wounded, he collapsed, and he was found in a kind of semi-conscious state by the IDF, who finally arrived, and they very nearly shot him because they thought he was a terrorist. And somebody then said, "He's wearing tzitzit!" And they didn't kill him. In the days that followed, two things happened. People went into shock and grief and trauma. People have been going to funeral after funeral after funeral after shiva after funeral. The numbers are enormous relative to the population. At the same time, there's been such a tremendous feeling of everybody pulling together, everybody coming together. Such a spirit you can't imagine. As you all know, until this happened, Israel was so riven by internal fighting that people were thinking there'd be a civil war. Overnight, not overnight, within the hour, that changed completely. Became one people again, one people fighting for their life, for the life of their nation, became a nation again. And the last thing I would say is, what's it like being there? It is absolutely terrifying. You have this conversation in your head all the time. Am I going to be safer in the communal shelter? What exactly are they protecting me against in the communal shelter? Are they protected against chemicals? Are they protected against bombs? I mean, why will I be buried alive in the communal shelter in the basement? Would I be better off in the stairwell? And quite a lot of us are choosing the stairwell. So that's what it's like in Jerusalem at the moment.
And yet you said earlier when we were talking that you wanted to be there, not here.
Yes, I'm here. I have to tell you that I'm not here because I love Jake, although that is true. I'm here because I have some prior engagements in America to speak. And first of all, there was the question of whether I could actually get out of the country. There's only one airline flying, as far as I know, which is El Al. Everything else has basically stopped. But that wasn't the real consideration. The real consideration was, we have a daughter and grandchildren in Israel, and we have a son and grandchildren here. But the real consideration was, I didn't feel, being there is as I've described it. The grief is indescribable, it's communal. The terror is indescribable, it's communal. The national spirit is indescribable. But I feel that this is where I really am meant to be. Because this is Jewish destiny unfolding. Whatever's going to happen, this is the latest seismic chapter in our extraordinary history. And I feel my place is there. So I decided I certainly couldn't leave the country. And then I thought, perhaps I should. And then I thought I shouldn't. And anyway, here I am. And so I'm going to America, I hope. And then I'll be back here for a couple of days on the way back from America. And then I hope to be back in Israel next week. Whether or not I'll be able to get back, it depends on what's actually going on, what stage the war has reached.
One thing that came to my mind as you were talking was some polling which was released just today, I think, or yesterday, taken from inside Israel, that showed that levels of optimism amongst Israelis has actually grown since the war about the future of their country. Amongst Israeli Arabs, it's remaining about the same, about 31%, I think it was. But amongst the wider population, the Jewish population, it's grown significantly about their future, which has resonated with what you were saying about the spirit of.
I'm not surprised. I'm not. It is. The Israelis are the most extraordinary people, and it's very hard to describe. It sounds like a sort of trite cliche. We're all coming together and so on, but the sense of being buoyed up by this sense of everybody, in this together. And it's partly because so many people, virtually, as I say, virtually every family is touched by this in some way. I met somebody in the street. He has 5 sons and a son-in-law in harm's way in Gaza, on the border, in the north. I met another man who I know very vaguely. I said, "How are you?" He said, "One grandson thank God, he's injured. He's home, he's injured. Another grandson we don't know where he is. And he cried in the street. People are crying all the time. It's an extraordinary experience. It's life being lived there at the moment at a pitch of intensity you can't imagine. But the intensity has got its terrible side and its good side.
Well, Howard, moving to you, if you can paint a picture of what the last couple of weeks has been like, seeing this from a British angle,
well,
through British eyes.
I can't paint a picture anything like Melanie's. Indeed, I'm not. Is this thing working? Yes. Indeed, I'm not even sure I should be here, because all I've done is watch television. I too have cried a lot, but I've watched a lot of television. Can I just say one thing? I come here often. I've always known I like Jewish faces. I've always known I like the intelligence and the humanity of Jewish faces. I've never known I've liked them so much as I do at the moment. And I've never thought of myself as somebody that needs comfort and hugs. And I mean, that's some hugs. You need a hug. I don't need a hug. People have come up to me on the street, actually, and said, "You don't know who I am. I'm frightened." Someone comes up to you in the street and you don't know. You do a quick face check. I think that, yes, that's a face that's got humanity in it. It'll be, I'm going to say, so they'll be Jewish. So I give the hug back, and there's a kind of a little communion. This is what it's like here. It's very undramatic, but we're just going out on the street and hugging one another. I get notes from Jewish friends, desolating notes. I got one only 2 days ago from someone very successful young man who runs an art gallery in New York. And he just says, "I'm so alone. I'm so completely alone." And I wrote back and I said, "But you've got friends and family." Yes, but I mean, in my profession, nobody in my profession is writing to me with support. None of the galleries are supporting Israel. Do you know, something's just occurred to me, seeing Dan Patterson here. The last time I was here, we were talking about Jewish jokes. That seems a long time ago. The world was young then. And last night I gave a lecture and I thought I'd dare to tell a Jewish joke. To remind the audience of what it was like when we were good, when we could take risk jokes. And the joke wasn't my joke, it was just Lenny Bruce saying, so it's 60 years ago, saying, yeah, we killed Christ, but it was only for 3 days. That made us feel so good in the 60s, that kind of joke. I don't know what the jokes are now, but they'll come. They will eventually come. So I've got nothing to report, really, except extreme sadness and the fact I'm always on language watch anyway. Language is what I do. Words are what I believe in. Words are the only things I have, really. And it's been very interesting to me to watch who has words and who doesn't. That's it. That people fall into categories immediately. If you cannot find some words to describe the horror of that day, you aren't human. So you get a lot of that, well, it was terrible. You know, the equalizing? There was that letter from 2,000 artists. Can you imagine artists? You tell me any no real artist would have signed that letter. There were lots of Jews. We know who they are. They sign everything. Miriam Margolyes, I made this joke yesterday too. Miriam Margolyes will boycott a bagel if she thinks it was baked in Israel. And there were others it's like a joke. You take no notice of them. Here they go again. It's a joke. This is not a joke. This was one thing, this was the letter you don't sign. This was the text. You talk about destiny. This was the moment of their destiny. If you sign that letter, all right, you don't want to import baked beans from that settlement, and you don't want to read that academic. All right, it's wrong, it's wicked, it's profoundly stupid, but all right. But to sign this letter, in which you minimize what happened on that day as violence. I think they said violence. Violence is when somebody bumps into you in the street and grabs your mobile phone. It's not what happened on that day. And if 2,000 artists, which includes writers, could not find the language not only could not, all right, you can't find the language because it's beyond language. You can't find the language because you don't know where to find the words. At least no, say that, I can't find the words. Or shut up. We've been taught by many people, that so many of those people who went through the Holocaust said they were silent. Writers were silent for years. You don't run in. What's it like? Sorry, I'm ranting, but I can't help it. What's it like to be a Jew who runs in immediately in days in response to what they saw, and if they didn't see it, they should have seen it, or what they read about, with something as trite as another act of violence? Now, I can't say what I can't. I've got a sentence forming about hell. The word is hell in it, and there's a word may in it, and there's a word they in it, and there's a word go in it, and there's a word to in it. But I'm not going to put that sentence together. You put that sentence together.
Tanya, this is. I know you've been writing for us quite a lot about your confrontations with people who, as Howard says, don't take this stuff seriously. In fact, militate on the other side. What has been your experiences over the past couple of weeks?
I have mostly been reading Twitter. And I think when I interviewed you a couple of years ago, Howard, you told me that social media would destroy the world.
Was I right?
Yes, you were right. Because it's a harbinger of what's to come, I think. And I was a bit disturbed, Jake, when you told me that we were going to try and cheer everybody up with this event tonight.
Not sure that's quite the words I used. Morale, I think, was the word.
Morale, sorry. Because I don't have any words of comfort. I just feel, as you do, completely shocked, but at the same time, not shocked at all. I've spent a lot of time, and I accept that my experience is in no way comparable to the experience of people in Israel. I'm a diaspora Jew, but I have my own negotiation with the non-Jewish world around me. And I was always so proud to be a British Jew, because, I mean, we were the winners of history, right? You know, we were the only intact community in Europe, except possibly the Albanians, but that's quite a niche subject. You know, we say our really passive-aggressive prayer for the royal family. May God in His everlasting kingdom. And we felt secure and we felt loved. And maybe some of us, I don't know if anyone here agrees, would believe, you know, it never would have happened here. You know, if the Nazis had landed, the people of Britain would have stepped up for us. They wouldn't have let us. And I mean, I just have to say to you, I'm not sure I believe that any longer. And maybe it's just I've been on Twitter, and what they say about Twitter is all tweets are generated by 2% of Twitterers, and they're all insane. But what I've seen there is a return to medieval anti-Semitism. I mean, you all know the history of the Jews. I mean, as I said, Britain is proud. We are proud to be British Jews, and yet we had the first blood libel. The blood libel was invented here in Norwich in 1844. I've been to Norwich. Is there anyone here from Norwich? No, okay, good. Something interesting happened in Norwich. They have a first. In 1290, of course, we were expelled, the first expulsion. Britain is very proud of having let in the 10,000 children of the Kindertransport, but where were their parents? Immigration to Palestine was policed. The Evian Conference, they offered almost nothing. Jewish children who came here from Germany had to be sponsored by families. And so really, and I accept that this is just a mank of what's happening in Israel. What's happening in Israel is the real deal, and for the rest of us, here it's just sort of ripples. But I feel, and I don't think I'll continue to feel like this because I really hope I don't, but I feel like my relationship with Britain has been shattered. You know, I looked at journalists that I've always admired, you know, journalists who would summon a world that I felt that I wanted to live in, you know, a world of fairness without child poverty. You know, I've been banging the drum about child poverty for years and years, and growing inequality and societies that are unequal or unstable. And I've waited for these people to say a word that they were sorry, that they cared that these people were butchered, and they said nothing. They said nothing. Among my friends, my non-Jewish friends, Nothing. My husband wants to bomb Gaza to the Stone Age, which I don't find very helpful. My non-Jewish husband. He said, let's bomb it forward to the Stone Age, which I thought was awful. I just did want to say, I'm not going to ramble on too long because I know people really want to hear from Melanie and Howard. I shouldn't be surprised because in 2016, when Corbyn took control of the Labour Party, I covered this. I covered the As a Jews, I covered the Jewish Voice for Labour. I've had lunch with Jackie Walker. I've watched them stand up and cheer inside a room of non-Jews with a couple of token Jews to cheer for Ken Loach, the man who champions the most anti-Semitic document of the mid-20th century, which is, of course, the play Perdition, which on a small matter charges the Jews more generally with self-murder. And I'm going to finish on this. I think it was you, Howard, who wrote, in fact, I know it was you when you wrote your superb piece on The Promise, when you said that Holocaust denial is old hat. Now the charge is that we have failed to learn from the Shoah. Well, I would say that we've gone further now. We've gone to, it's our fault. Because what I'm hearing is the characterization of the Jew as demonic. The Jew can do nothing right. And again, I feel I'm plagiarizing you too much, but you always argued, and I felt this was very, very true, that if the Jews are responsible for the Shoah, if we brought it on ourselves, as you know, the parallels to the crucifixion are obvious, which, by the way, we didn't do, it was the Romans. If we did it to ourselves, there's nothing to be afraid of, and these people can live in this paradise where they don't need to be afraid that their civilization will collapse, even as it collapses around them. And the final thing I want to say is I wanted to say something about, because there are two main elements, there are two kinds of anti-Semite in this country. There are young, radicalized Muslims and stupid kids. And then there is the educated bourgeois left. And I really struggle to what is in it for these people. And I wish I understood. But the only thing that makes any sense to me at all, a flicker of an idea, is that these people say, if they're not anti-capitalist, they believe in fairness, right? They believe in their own moral goodness. And yet they benefit, all of them. They are at the top of a society. They benefit from every benefit a wealthy liberal democracy can give them. And yet they feel guilty, but not guilty enough to actually do anything about it. And so they launder their souls through us. We are the signifiers of their goodness. And the only thing that I'm really afraid of, and you know, forgive me if I've got the wrong words, the only thing I'm really afraid of, because I think this stuff is 2,000 years old. You know, I don't think any of this stuff is new. I think we've been so lucky that we've seen nothing. Very little since the Shoah. There was a polite pause after the Shoah, a silence. Is what I'm seeing, what I fear is that what people want is for us to fulfill our destiny in their eyes, which is toppled, our morality in the dust. My builder wrote on Facebook, I live in West Cornwall, and my builder, I've been looking for anti-Semitism everywhere, but luckily in Cornwall, most people don't know what a Jew is. He said, people don't like it when you think you're better than everybody else. And I think that's it. I think that's the most profound thing I've heard this week. So it's wonderful to see you all. And I'm just going to end with a joke, because Howard repeating a joke, so I'm going to try a joke as well, which is, do you remember Woody Allen's The Whore of Mensa, in which he visits a prostitute, and for extra $30, he gets to watch her have a panic attack? Well, that's why I was very surprised that you were going to pay a £5 for tonight. That's me.
Thank you, Tanya. So I think can we beam in Johnny? No, we can't.
Oh.
Oh, we can't ask him about The Guardian.
Has The Guardian been particularly bad?
I believe that The Guardian, and obviously I can say this because Jonathan isn't here, I mean, I read all the papers every day. I've read all the papers every day for 20 years. If there is an immoral intellectual godfather to all of this in this country, if I had to put one man in the dock, I'd put Alan Rusbridger in it. Because it's The Guardian. It has been, over the last 20 years, massacre in Jenin. There was no massacre. You know, the partiality, the lack of fairness, you know, the taking... I blame, if I had to blame one person, I'd blame him, because he has made it respectable. All those university teachers, those artists, those artists, they sign those letters because the Guardian says they can.
In fact, Melanie, you know that from first-hand experience.
Yes, I'm so old, my memory goes back even further than Alan, whose first day at The Guardian I remember. My epiphany at The Guardian, which started the change in my entire political personality, was in 1982, when I realized that I was a Jew and on the other side to them.
And you were at The Guardian at that point?
I was at The Guardian for another, whatever it was, 10 years after that. They were pretty bad. They were pretty bad then.
Right. But how do we feel about? I mean, there are lots of people in the Jewish community, as in every other walk of life, who their politics are on the left. Aside from Israel, aside from Jews, they naturally would find the left to be their political home. How do you think those people feel now? Howard, what do you think?
Well, I don't know people. I mean, I'm not a political being, really. I'm always told you are. Everything you say is political. But I don't feel it is. And I don't know people on the left, really. I don't know what they're like. All my friends have always been, I mean, not right-wingers, but not, my first day at university, I remember, when you have Freshers' Day and people run at you to join things, the silliest people there were the left. It was preposterous. And there was something, I had a phrase about...
Why was it preposterous? Why was it preposterous?
Because they expected me to believe lunatic things, and they expected me to believe in an impossible amelioration, and they expected me to agree with them. Agreement is one of the problems now, I think, and it's what you were saying about what the internet does, what social media does, is although they're all fighting one another, the truth is that fight pretty well stops when they've got something they can all agree about, as with this. The daisy chain, the left thinks that if you feel this, you therefore must feel that, and therefore you must feel that. It'd be interesting to know how many of the people who have been cheering on the cheerleaders for terror, who to me are much more frightening than the terrorists. The terrorists you can shoot. They come in, they do terrible things, but you can shoot. The more wicked thing is to actually see babies being shot and then to party about it, and then to think it's great, and then to think something was going around where it was as though somebody had to avenge the fact that we'd been killed. You've been killed, and how do we avenge ourselves for that? We kill you more. Isn't that the whole history, in fact, of the way anti-Semitism has worked? Dave Rich said something really good the other day about, who was he talking to? It doesn't matter. And he was saying, it's as though there's orgiastics out there. There is so much the excitement of seeing Jewish blood.
Yes, that's it.
And that's what it must have been like in Germany in the excitement of seeing Jewish blood. And the feeling that you can kill. This isn't an answer to your question, it's just a rant. I can only rant now. Just for the time being, there is only, you cry or you rant. And there's something mysterious about this idea that you must avenge yourself on what you've done to that person. Is it guilt? I have just killed this Jew. Rather than feel bad about killing this Jew, I will now kill another Jew. And in the killing of the other Jew, I exorcise my guilt. Freud's got something about this somewhere. Freud, who is so good about anti-Semitism when he's not being one himself, which he wasn't. He wasn't that often. And that was the most bizarre and terrifying thing. It self-perpetuates. The joy of anti-Semitism, once you've really got the blood up and once you're really going, is there's no reason for it to stop. The heartbreak for an anti-Semite, I tell you what left-wing anti-Semites think at night? They dread when there are no Jews left, because then what do they do? What did they do? And we know, and it's a common story, that when the Jews were expelled from Spain and when the Jews were expelled from Portugal, it didn't stop anti-Semitism. It almost doesn't need a Jew. There is almost a thing called anti-Semitism to which we Jews are just, we're superfluous. We are superfluous to the murder. Those plays that were being written, The Merchant of Venice, The Jew of Malta, were being written in Elizabethan England when there were no Jews. There hadn't been any there for years. As you said, they'd been kicked out 400 years before. One or two had crept in and had a nose job. Otherwise, there were no Jews. And yet audiences could still... Those plays were so... The reason Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice was that his theatre company had said, look what Marlowe's just had. Huge success with The Jew of Malta. You do one. So he said, I'd do one, only he did a good one, in which, by my reading, the Jew isn't horrible. The Jew is actually a bit of a hero. But what was it that those theatre companies understood? They understood that you sell seats by being vile about Jews. So the Jew now we actually don't exist. You think you exist, you don't. You are actually an idea in the heart. No, not the heart, they don't have a heart. You are an idea in the, what do they have? It's not in a shami, what do they have? You are an idea in the rotting gut of the anti-Semite. You're just a germ in the rotting gut of the anti-Semite. They don't need you. You think if they don't need us, they'll just leave us alone and go somewhere else and just practice.
In fact, there was some research a few years ago by a couple of German economists who found that in parts of Germany where in the 14th century they had burned Jews at the stake because they blamed them for the Black Death, 600 years later were more likely to vote for the Nazis in those same areas. And that was despite the fact, as you said, that for 400 of those years, there were no Jews in those areas. They left. And so this, as you said, this germ, this sort of stream of bigotry, it has the ability to pass down from one generation to the next, even without the Jews there in front of them.
And it's bigger, it's bigger than...
I have something on this.
I'm just wondering whether... We have Jonathan. Tanya, hold that thought. Johnny, are you there?
Hello there.
It's like a seance.
I can hear you.
An idea.
I can hear you and I can see you.
You can. We can't see you, Johnny.
Oh.
It's like speaking to God. Johnny, you're coming through the speakers, but we can't see you.
Well, I can. It's got the video is.
Oh, there you are.
Am I there now?
Hello. Right, we can see you, and you're about 20 times the size of anybody else.
Can only apologise for that.
Johnny, I know we've only got you for a short time, so thank you so much for joining us from Sweden.
In Stockholm, yeah, with a Jewish group here who are sharing many of the concerns I'm sure we're all feeling there.
So we've been talking a little bit here about just trying to digest how everyone's been experiencing the last 2 weeks. And then we were talking a bit about the left and how the left has responded. Maybe you can talk us through, from your point of view, what it's been like, what your thoughts have been over the past couple of weeks, and where it's led you to now.
Well, sorry to everyone there that I can't be with you in person and we're having to do it electronically. I'm here in Stockholm talking about The Escape Artist, which has just come out in Swedish, the story of the man who broke out of Auschwitz to warn the world. And obviously the questions of Jewish suffering and persecution are suddenly very fresh and current rather than historical. And I was like many of those who felt when I read the accounts of what happened on October the 7th, as if we were reading something that really we had left behind. I didn't make the parallels with the Shoah. Rather, it struck me as being something from an earlier part of our history. The parallel that came to me was Kishinev in 1903 and the pogrom there. And I know that some people have pushed back against that and have said it can't be a pogrom because that was when Jews were stateless and undefended and were in the minority, and now there is an Israel and Jews are majority. But for those hours, while those victims were waiting for an army to protect them, waiting hours and hours and hours, it was like a reversion to Jewish life and Jewish death before there was a Jewish state to defend and protect Jews. And so I think it did evoke that horrible memory. And the days since have been, if anything, it's got worse. And I can't really think of many experiences like that where it hasn't sort of faded. The pain of it is not fading, it's actually deepening as the weeks have passed. And to come to your question about the left, I mean, I think this has added to the sense of agony, because there was this assumption captured brilliantly. I hope you haven't already quoted it, maybe you have, but Dara Horn's collection, People Love Dead Jews. And there was this sort of glum realization, or rather there was a glum expectation after what happened on October the 7th, that, well, at least now there will be some sympathy for us, because this is the kind of Jews, isn't it, that we've told ourselves the world can rally behind, which is Jews as victims. And yet, within hours of it happening, there was a sudden thought that actually people don't even love dead Jews. That when Jews are butchered in this way, they don't actually immediately arouse sympathy in some quarters. And this is the thing I do want to slightly stress, is yes, we are all, and I include here, by the way, many in Israel, are really perturbed by the academic left, the people who signed some of those letters that have been going around, the manifestos and petitions issued out of Harvard and many American universities. At that level, there is something really alarming, and we should talk about it. But we should also not forget where the left in power are. And so Joe Biden is absolutely at Israel's side, and he's promised extraordinary help and giving extraordinary help. And in Britain, Keir Starmer has been, paying a political price for being so solidly behind Labour. So in terms of where the left, broadly defined, is in power, I don't think we have to be deeply alarmed. In fact, there is comfort to be taken. But elsewhere, the reaction has been alarming, and it's partly the speed of it. I mean, it was immediate. I certainly, and this is the last thing I'll say because I'm sure you want to come in, but the days that passed later when Israel was responding and retaliating, I think we all expected that there would then be a hostile reaction from people on the sort of hard left. I think it was the speed of it. They went to the reaction before there'd even been a reaction, and that has been a very jolting and I think chilling experience for many.
So, Johnny, can you hear me? Okay, you can. So I know you've got to go in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to ask you before you go, with regard to the left. So there was some polling that was carried out by YouGov just a day or two after October the 7th, which showed this very, very clear political divide, in which amongst Tory voters, 39% of people sympathised with Israel and only 6% with the Palestinians. But on the left, amongst Labour voters, notwithstanding what you said about Keir Starmer, and I agree with you, but amongst actual Labour voters, 27% of people, their sympathies were with the Palestinians, and only, I think, 9% were with the Israelis. This was, I think, a day or two after October the 7th. What is going on, Johnny?
Well, I mean, I haven't seen those particular numbers, so I'd obviously want to look closely at them. But on the basis of what you've just said, I think there has been a sort of a template that has been applied from other issues to this one, and the other issues are identity politics and so on. So that, for example, in America, just to put some distance on it, this was going on even before this episode, which was the sort of Black Lives Matter template was imposed on the Israel-Palestine conflict as if one was just a read across from the other, so that Free Palestine was the companion slogan alongside Black Lives Matter. And therefore, if you were on, the side of Black Americans against, a coercive and racist police force, then obviously you must be with the Palestinians and against Israel. It was seen as being that crude and that, binary. And I think that binary has persisted, and obviously based on the polling you've said there, has put down deeper roots. And so if you're, the key thing, the message that has been offered by many who are, agitating and campaigning on this is that it's simple. There's a good side, Palestinians, there's a bad side, Israelis, and that's all you need to know. And if you don't have any history and you don't have any geography, and that's all you know is just slogans, then you fall into line. And it's been a really dismaying experience.
Ignorance and ideology, Johnny.
Well, I think it's for, I'm not sure. Well, it's an ideology of sorts. I mean, those people who are tweeting immediately, this is a day to be celebrated. It's decolonization in action. There's an ideology there. But otherwise, I think it's just a straightforward story of power versus powerless. And if you think that Israeli, and Jewish history began in 2020, then yeah, maybe you think that the Israelis are the party of power. And that's the end of it. But if you know anything of Jewish history and you're looking at this as a 2,000-year story rather than a 2-year story, then you know that one side in this can't be just branded as the powerful and the other the powerless. That's not how Jews see it. But unfortunately, and again, I think we shouldn't overestimate the scale of it, but unfortunately there are many who buy into that narrative, and we are on the wrong side of that narrative. And it makes me think that as a community, we have to do a whole lot more to explain more of Israel's origins, its necessity, and the Jewish past, because clearly it's not understood and it's very, very blithely ignored. And that's a very, very daunting challenge. And it's a very hard one for us to focus on when everyone is actually still just grieving and worried about what comes next.
All right, well, Johnny, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Sweden, and good luck with the rest of your book event. And we'll see you soon, I suppose.
Thank you, and sorry not to be with you at first.
All right, thanks, Johnny. Bye. So we haven't got that long left, but I wanted really to start to think a little bit about what we can do, how we can feel, how we can think about ourselves in the coming challenging weeks and months. There's been a lot of controversy and debate around whether Jewish kids should show that they're Jewish externally as they go to school and back, wear their kippot, wear their blazers that identify them as being Jewish, whether rabbis should wear the kippot to shul. Had that discussion with a rabbi quite recently. And I just wanted to explore the idea of our own identity here and our own sense of pride and safety. And I wondered if maybe you could each give me some of your thoughts on that. Perhaps starting with Melanie, what do you think?
Well, I'm not here anymore, so I'm really the last person to start telling people here how to live. What would I think if I was the mother of a child at a Jewish school with a uniform? I would say, don't wear your blazer. I would not say, be a hero, dear, because I'd be his mother or her mother. On the other hand, I fully understand that, once you take off your kippah and your blazer, you've given in, you've given up. So it is a very difficult thing to advise people how to behave, both, as it were, as individuals and as a collective. How should everybody behave? This is such a fraught and difficult issue. But one thing I would say, which is always, I've thought this for a very long time, which is that, as Jonathan just said, so many people don't, it's ideology and it's also ignorance. And a lot of people here are ignorant. They're ignorant for various reasons. They're ignorant because they have been basically fed one narrative for the last N decades, mainly through the universities and through the school system and through the media, which positions Israel as the illegal, illegitimate colonizer of somebody else's land, and the Palestinians as the oppressed people who are the indigenous people and who were thrown out and are now being oppressed. And every part of that is untrue. And especially people who are young, who've never heard anything else, and know nothing else, they know no history, they've bought it in its entirety. Now, this has been going on for decades, and we're now seeing the results. But what has always struck me over many decades, when some of us have been trying to point out various things and being howled down for it, which is that, and it's coming out now in what America is saying. There are the bad Palestinians and there are the good Palestinians. The bad Palestinians, okay, we now accept they're the Hamas. Okay, all right, we get it. Do what you have to do with them, fine. Or not fine, but anyway, fine. But then There are the good Palestinians. Now, the good Palestinians are the Palestinian Authority. Okay, let's all agree there are people in every society, including Palestinians, who are perfectly good people. All they want is like what you and I want, to live quietly, to raise their families in peace and security, have a good job. Fine. But nevertheless, the Palestinian Authority, which is what the so-called civilized countries of the West have been negotiating with and on behalf of for the last N decades, as the rightful inheritors or the rightful future governors of a state to which they're entitled. That authority is pumping out, week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, to its children that their highest duty in life is to murder Jews and steal their land. Those are the people who are the good Palestinians. Now, that's been going on for decades. No one says a word. The Jewish community here does not say a word about this. It rises up against the BBC. Heaven help us, the BBC. Let's not get into that one for a start. But nevertheless, it rises up when the BBC does something particularly egregious, like the children on the bus who were accused of saying horrible things about Muslims. Fine. But month in, month out, year in, year out, the Jewish community does not say, everybody's being told a lie about the Palestinian cause. The Palestinian cause is not about the division of land. The conflict about Israel is not about the division of land. What's going on in Israel for the last 100 years is the attempt by one set of people to exterminate the Jewish homeland. Now, they don't say that. The state of Israel doesn't say that. No one says it. They all say, we all agree that, the solution is the division of the land. Nobody says this thing that is the Middle East conflict that goes on without limit of time is fueled by the desire to exterminate the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland and to kill Jews.
Melanie, just one thing. You feel that thing very strongly.
I do.
And you're very persuasive. Not everybody will go all the way with you.
I doubt it.
Even I won't go all the way with you, and I'll go all the way with almost anyone. I won't go all the way, and I think a lot of people here, Jews, won't go all the way. Our weakness is that we think we might be wrong. Our weakness is our power, our imaginative power that makes us artists and thinkers and philosophers is we do want to see the other side, and we are somewhat masochistic because we've lost a lot and learned to survive through losing. We can't half want to think the other side might be not just as right as us, but maybe even more right than us. I agree with you. That one has to change now. That we have to be stronger in telling that horrible buzzword narrative.
Okay.
The narrative you describe, you're quite right. That's the narrative that's prevailed, and whether it's good of us or not to have allowed it to prevail, it's got us where we are. So we need to tell our narrative, which might not be the entire opposite to that one, but it's stronger than the narrative that we do tell, and we have to not be so quiescent about the other narrative. Do we all in this room know enough? Have we read enough? Do we know? You talked about 2000. Have we read enough books? You read books by historians about the founding of Israel, and you read things you don't like, because there's no story of the settlement of a land that doesn't involve cruelties and unfairness. But you will also read stuff that will give you inspiration and make you feel, no, I do have a story to tell here, and it's a strong story, and it's the opposite to, or at least it's a corrective to that story. And if we don't know it, then our kids don't know it. Just occasionally, I've talked at a school or somewhere or other, and parents have come up and they've said, oh, I wish we'd said that. I wish you were here. I wish you were one of their teachers. I wish you'd... The kids don't know what to think. We haven't steeled them enough. We haven't taught them enough. We're too delighted if they're good at football or something. We used to be very proud of our own intelligences, on our own knowledge, and the knowledge intelligence of our kids, and I think we've let that slip. Every one of us should have a chat. I should talk. Quite a lot of good I've been, but nonetheless, I see it from the outside. Every one of us should bring up our children. The books should be there. They should know what to think. They should know how to protect themselves, and they should know how to clean up those cretins that they're going to encounter on their campuses when they go, if the poor buggers...
Tanya, we're coming to the last few minutes. How do you feel about that idea that part of the problem is that we don't know enough and that we have to sort of bolster our ability to put forward the truth by knowing more?
Well, when I read Dave Rich's very recent book about how to fight anti-Semitism, which I advise you all to read, I thought he made a really brilliant point about how non-Jewish people need to talk about this. Why is this our history? Because it's really their history. I agree with you. Of course, we need to know more, but knowing more hasn't really helped us so much so far. I wanted to tell you how you can get toy Jews in Poland. Did you know that? They're fashionable. I think that goes into point. I have two things that I found potentially consoling this week that might not actually be consoling at all. The first is you have to look at the quality of your enemies. Are we hated by anyone we actually respect? That was the first one, because I think I wrote on Twitter, the tankies' main characteristic is stupidity. These people are so stupid. So that cheered me up a bit. And the other thing is, we are a tribe of the ancient world, and here we are in October 2023, sitting on the Finchley Road, in a city then, well, in a place then that would have been a hill overlooking a marsh, right? So every single person in this room, or their ancestors, and us, we made a choice. Every single one of us made a choice to be a Jew. And it's not easy. It's wonderful sometimes, but it's not easy. And the one thing I will say to my son, I know they always used to go for boxing lessons, didn't they, after shul, so they could knock the anti-Semite down, but I'll just try to imbue him with pride in who he is and the wonderful heritage that he carries within us. And maybe there'll be less shame now and maybe more pride, but not less fear.
Thank you, Tanya. Melanie, any last thoughts about Israel, where you'll be returning quite soon?
We are the eternal people. Israel will survive this. It will have changed. We cannot possibly say how it will have changed, but this is a seismic event, and it will change it. And Jewish people will have changed as a result of this as well in the diaspora. And this is so enormous, we don't know how it's going to change it. And Israel will, we don't know how this is going to change the geopolitics of the world as it affects Israel or as it affects all of us. But I do feel that Israel is not quite carrying the burden, not quite in the front line, it's not quite the right metaphor. But what Israel is experiencing and has experienced since that terrible day 2.5 weeks ago is a kind of microcosm and macrocosm, if you like. It's an example, an illustration in a particularly focused and dreadful way of a sickness in the world that is poisoning the West. Israel is fighting for its survival. It's fighting for the life of its people. It's fighting for itself. But it's fighting an evil which has consumed much of the world. And we all have to, I think everybody has to realize, and most people won't realize, that people should realize, that Israel is fighting for everybody. And it's not surprising, although it is a little wearing, to find the Jewish state and the Jewish people once again at the center, at the focus of world events. I mean, we're such a tiny people. Isn't it extraordinary that every crisis, every conversation, every big thing centers on us? And I don't think it's at all surprising, because I think it relates to something Tanya said earlier, that we, the Jewish people, and this sounds very hubristic, but I believe it to be true, we gave civilization to the world. And civilization is now turning on itself. And it's turning on the people who gave it the civilization. And that people is struggling now in the front line of the attempt to defend itself and that civilization. And it's quite simple. No less and no more than that is at stake. It cannot be more momentous. And I'm going back to that front line, and I can't wait to get back there, and I can't wait to shelter again in my stairwell, where I will be wondering whether this is the beginning of a new front from the north, which is going to completely lay waste to large tracts of Israel, whether it's the last dying throes of the Hamas, but I will be very proud and very pleased and very privileged to be there in the fight that Israel is fighting for everybody who is civilized in the world.
Albert. And the book should be called Civilization in the Stairwell.
I happen to be writing it.
Well, thank you all so much for coming, and join me in applauding the panelists one more time.